The Earth is in the middle between Mars and Venus, but Venus should not be so hot. It should be warm.
Through the terrifying stories of lost astronauts in space, secret explosive accidents, and unreported encounters with the impossible, the Soviets' hidden reports continue to amaze modern thinkers and astronomers even today. Joe Rogan, a popular commentator and podcast host, believes these secrets are still being unveiled, with the most recent revelations coming from a late astronaut who served the Soviet Union at its peak. What did he reveal, and how will it affect what we know about the universe? Join us as we explore the terrifying secrets revealed by the late astronaut.
The Dragon capsule, which can seat many astronauts and go fully around the moon. Now, starting next year.
The space race. Uncovering the Soviets' terrifying secrets is a difficult task, marked by a long history of exciting discoveries, crushing failures, and hidden tragedies. These events go way back to the mid-40s, a time when the world was still recovering from a global conflict, and the Soviet Union had taken control of most of Eastern Europe. Fearing the American rivals would try to stop them in future endeavors, they had to build systems to defend themselves and demonstrate their superiority in all aspects apart from warfare. This paved the way for some of the biggest discoveries that remained hidden for decades until they were finally brought to light in a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. Keep watching as we delve deeper into the terrifying history and chilling secrets of space exploration. With the US and the Soviet Union unwilling to start another global conflict, the Soviets and the US began to compete in other things, from having the best army to building the best technologies. It wasn't long after when both countries began to compete in space exploration, with both sides aiming to be the first to send a man to the moon. The battle kicked off when German rocket scientists built the V2 rocket, a dreaded revenge machine, with propulsion systems powerful enough to make it the first human-made object to reach the edge of space. Realizing the power of this technology, both the Soviet Union and the United States quickly got in on the action. With information obtained from captured rocket scientists, the Soviets took some parts from the V2 back to their country to study them. Realizing how powerful the missile truly was, Sergei Korolev, the most brilliant rocket scientist among the Soviets, dreamed of building even bigger rockets capable of going further than the V2. Now, it wasn't about building better weapons with impressive features, but having the most powerful machines capable of reaching and exploring the heavens in full detail. With this wild dream in mind, Korolev approached the Soviet government with a plan for launching the first artificial satellite. He wanted to build machines capable of reaching space, and he wanted to do this before the US. To his delight, just a few months later, the plan was approved and the money was provided for Korolev and his team to build the R-7 rocket, the first powerful machine capable of reaching orbit. The first test was a huge success, and things got even more exciting later on when they completed the Sputnik 1, a small but heavy metal sphere with 4 antennas. The job of the Sputnik was simple: beep a radio signal from space. By October of that year, at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, the new R-7 rocket blasted off with the satellite, and in just a few minutes, the Sputnik 1 was in orbit. The big moment came when scientists and radio operators around the world heard the beep sound, marking the first time a human-made object had orbited the Earth. This success shocked the world in many ways, but Korolev wanted to do much more. He wasn't satisfied with exploring the environment around Earth, but had set his eyes on the planets far away. Little did he know that this deep hunger for bigger results would lead to some of the most shocking discoveries ever kept from the public. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Decades before the late scientist gave his thoughts on these hidden secrets, now revealed by popular podcast host Joe Rogan, the Soviets were trying to find out whether it was possible to send humans to space, So just a month later, they launched the Sputnik 2 with a female dog on board. The dog, named Laika, became known as the first living creature in space, kept alive in a pressurized cabin with enough air for her to breathe properly. Tragedy struck when the rocket overheated just 2 hours later, but it showed the Soviets that it was possible for living things to survive in space with the right equipment. Now, Korolev had successfully sent a machine into space, put the next one in orbit, and sent the first animal beyond the skies. The next step at this point was clear: send the first set of humans to space. This was both an exciting and terrifying concept at the time, and meanwhile, the Americans were rushing to catch up. After witnessing the success of the Sputnik missions, they tried to build their satellite, the Vanguard, but it failed at launch. They wouldn't have their first successful satellite until the following year, and by that time, the Soviets were already making plans to send mankind to space. The early space race had begun, and there was no turning back. By December 1959, Korolev no longer kept his dreams secret. As wild as they were, he let the world know that the Soviets meant business in the space race, and they were now building a spacecraft capable of reaching the planet Venus. This was where things no longer made sense. This was a very ambitious endeavor, making many people wonder why the Soviets were suddenly bold enough to take this huge leap of faith. Keep in mind that Laika, the animal they sent to space just 2 years earlier, only lived for a short time in the rocket due to overheating, and they hadn't even landed anything on the moon yet. What made them so confident about sending a machine to Venus when they hadn't even gotten beyond our planet's orbit? Now this is where it gets interesting. Problems with the official reports. Official sources tell us the Soviets never sent people to space until April 12, 1961. The first person to go there, according to these sources, was Yuri Gagarin, a pilot who flew through the Vostok 1 spacecraft. The flight lasted about 108 minutes, and he safely parachuted to the ground after re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. It was a huge moment in mankind's short history of space exploration, unless that wasn't the whole truth. You see, not long after famous pilot Yuri Gagarin was announced as the first man in space, a great number of experts and reporters began to insist it wasn't true, with some of them claiming to have evidence of secret disasters and terrifying encounters in space dating way back to the early 50s. This was due to several reasons. First of all, the Soviets had already built and launched a probe to explore Venus at a time when no human had reached orbit, let alone gotten to the moon. Secondly, multiple US and European intelligence agencies suspected the Soviets had secretly carried out space missions before 1961. It also didn't help that the Soviets were known for hiding failures and military disasters that painted them in a negative light. Things got even more suspicious when 2 Italian radio operators in the early 60s claimed they came across intercepted radio signals of dying astronauts who got abandoned and lost in space. According to the operators, Achille and Gian Battista, it was the death of these astronauts that caused the Soviets to send a space probe without people for their next operation. To avoid further tragedies, the next space operation, involving a human being, would not go beyond the Earth's orbit. And by playing it safe, the Soviets were able to use the hype and success of Yuri Gagarin's mission to cover up the tragedy that occurred before the Venus space probe. They claim the only reason we know about Yuri Gagarin's mission is because it worked. If it failed like the others did in the past, chances are nobody beyond the space agency would have known about it. Putting that aside, the Venus operation itself was riddled with problems from the get-go. Before that moment, there were a lot of things the world didn't know about Venus, but the Soviets were eager to know more about it before the United States. And that meant the Venera missions were just getting started, as we shall see. The Lunar and Venera missions. The result of their work was the Venera 1, a spacecraft equipped with solar panels, a radio antenna, and many other sensors for measuring temperature, radiation, and the planet's magnetic field. The big disappointment came on February 19th, barely a week after launch, when Mission Control suddenly lost all contact with the spacecraft. The experts reported that the most likely cause was overheating, but that seemed highly unlikely given the high number of heat sensors built into the spacecraft. The experts would have known about the rising temperature before it got critical enough to disable all communications. It was also strange that nobody reported what happened right before they lost contact with the spacecraft, and none of the reports given afterwards added up. For example, it was reported that Venera one flew past Venus on May 19th of that same year. As every astronaut would tell you, space exploration comes with a lot of uncertainties, and how they reported such precise details from mere probable calculations is still up in the air. By 1966, the Soviets' difficult situation quickly turned into great excitement when they successfully launched the Luna 9, the first spacecraft to safely land on the Moon after 8 failed attempts that spanned over a decade. About 2 years later, the Soviets launched the Venera 4 spacecraft. Launched on June 12, 1967, it was built to correct the mistakes made with the Venera 3, and on October 18th, after a 4-month journey from Earth, the Venera 4 successfully entered Venus' atmosphere, and what it discovered was breathtaking. The temperatures given back by the heat sensors on the spacecraft were almost off the charts, with high numbers reaching almost 900 degrees Fahrenheit. As if that wasn't frightening enough, the planet's surface pressure was over 90 times that of Earth, so intense that it crushed the lander before it could send back data about what the planet looked like from within. By late 1970, about a year after the US had successfully sent man to the Moon, Venera 7 had launched and landed safely on Venus. This spacecraft was built with better materials to withstand the intense pressures of the very deadly planet. Sadly, it turned out that wasn't enough, as the pressure on the planet's surface was much bigger than they expected, and as a result, the spacecraft only lasted 20 minutes after landing before getting crushed by natural forces. Besides giving slightly higher numbers than the Venera 6, no other important information was gotten before it stopped functioning, and all they got were heavily distorted images that showed nothing helpful as far as the mission was concerned. By the end of that year, the Soviet experts decided to take a step back by putting all Venus operations on hold so they could explore our other close neighbor in the solar system, the planet Mars. After 2 failed attempts, the Mars 3 spacecraft was the first to successfully land on the red planet. It had 2 main parts, an orbiter and a lander. The orbiter was made to study the atmosphere and take pictures of the lander and its environment from a far perspective, while the lander would touch down on the surface to study the planet's soil and weather. Based on the pictures the orbiter got from space and those gotten from the lander, we can now simulate what it looked like from a much closer perspective with AI and CGI, and it is a sight to behold. Aside from that, the lander sends images of what the planet looked like on ground level and gives back information on whether it was a planet worth visiting with humans through the next operation, or at least that was the plan. Less than 15 seconds after landing, Mission Control lost all signals from the lander, and to this day, nobody knows what caused it to stop working. Just like it was with the Venera 1, the popular report given by experts didn't add up, and the leading one implied that all signals were covered by dust storms. A few other experts suggested that it was caused by harsh temperatures and electronic malfunction, but these weren't good enough reasons because the lander was designed to handle these conditions. The electronic systems were tested time and time again before launch, and all diagnostics showed the systems were working in peak condition before it landed. This caused people to believe both machines were attacked by aliens, and nobody would see real surface images from another planet until June 1975, when Venera 9 and 10 landed on Venus. Venera 9 was the first to take pictures, showing a barren, rocky surface with large, reddish, flat areas, and then came the shocking part, the Venera and Mars missions. The images sent back from Venera 9 seemed to imply that the clouds in the sky weren't made of water, but sulfuric acid. The experts chose not to believe it until Venera 10 arrived shortly after and confirmed the same thing. And with this, they were able to come up with a stunning description of what would happen if a human set foot on the planet without protection. From the hour-long period the spacecraft managed to survive on that planet, scientists could tell that sending humans there was far from a good idea. Even though humans on Venus wear heavy protective material, chances are they would get cooked within seconds from the inside due to the higher temperatures before getting crushed by the immense pressure. The Venera 9 and 10, even though they were made of the best materials available at the time, got crushed and melted by the burning rain of sulfuric acid barely an hour after landing. These rains fall so frequently that the spaces in between showers aren't even enough for a routine operation. With the best available materials and technologies unable to survive Venus' harsh environment, the Soviets set their sights back on Mars, hoping to use similar equipment to get better pictures from the red planet. The result of this was Mars 4, the mission that launched in 1973 and was the first to send pictures of what the planet looked like. With a very limited budget, this mission did not include a lander, but powerful cameras capable of showing what the surface looked like from a distance. It revealed that the planet's atmosphere was very thin and made mostly of carbon dioxide with only small amounts of nitrogen and argon. The surface of Mars was rocky and barren, just like Venus, but much less deadly while still being impossible for humans to live on. There were a lot of craters, mountains, and valleys. Places at the north and southern parts of the planet had regions that were frozen, and dust storms were very common in a lot of places. These storms were so large that they covered large areas of the surface. The experts could have learnt a lot more from this operation, but for some reason, the machine didn't fire its orbit propulsion systems when it should, and as a result, the spacecraft only flew by the planet instead of orbiting around it. Between 1976 and 1983, the Soviet Union continued to send more missions to Mars, including the Mars 5, Mars 6, and Mars 7 probes. Through these missions, the experts discovered volcanoes and signs of dried rivers. Many more clues implied that Mars was once a thriving planet with growing plants and water flowing everywhere. With inspiration from this success, the experts decided to give Venus one last try with the Venera 15 and 16 missions. Just as they did with Mars 4, they would also not use a lander, but rely on orbiting spacecraft to capture details of the planet's surface from afar. The big problem was the planet's very thick atmosphere, which made it difficult for even the most advanced cameras of the time to see through. To get around this, the engineers used radar technology to provide near-accurate maps of what the planet looked like, and it worked. These missions provided much clearer maps of Venus than ever before, including large active mountains and cracks on the surface. These were exciting times in the history of space exploration, but underneath the surface, there were a lot of problems coming up. The Soviet Union was no longer as united as it used to be, with economic difficulties growing worse every week and major political changes causing serious issues with funding at a time when the United States had caught up and gone ahead of them in the space race. The Cold War was slowly coming to an end, with the United States being the clear winner in the most recent operations. The last major program funded by the Soviet Union was brought up in the mid-80s. Called the Phobos program, it was put up for exploring the moon orbiting Mars, Phobos, and Deimos. To do this, the source agency launched two spacecraft, Phobos 1 and 2, in 1988 to explore these moons. Sadly, neither of them could return as much information as the Union wanted before getting disconnected by unknown forces. As usual, the experts went back to the drawing board to analyze what went wrong and how to fix it with the next launch. This time, however, it wasn't going to work, as the many economic and political difficulties plaguing the Union at the time made it impossible for the government to fund another operation. By late 1991, thanks to gross spending in the arms race, unexpected natural disasters, and internal conflicts within the Union, the entire body collapsed, and its space agency ceased to exist. Many reasons behind why the space agency collapsed as well were kept close to the chest, and the way it ended made it seem like there were no secret discoveries made along the way. But all it took was 1 year for the public to realize that a lot of things didn't add up, and by late 1992, many secrets slowly came to light. These secrets were terrifying to say the least, hinting at decades of lies and scandals committed by an agency desperately trying to be at the forefront of space exploration. What were these secrets? Why were they so tragic? And who were the people exposing them? Stay with us as we uncover these secrets and much more. Terrifying secrets from the Soviet Union. In the years following the Soviet Union's collapse, many previously classified and unexplained files were brought to light. These documents were declassified after the Union lost control of everything, and among the first things that went public was perhaps the most devastating event in the history of space exploration, and that event was the Nedelin disaster. According to the reports, the Soviets took their role in the space race far more seriously than the United States, so much so that they rushed many of their operations without proper testing, and the results were catastrophic. One great example of this was the Nedelin disaster, an event that famously stands as the most tragic moment in the history of space exploration. This occurred way back on October 24, 1960, when a simple rocket test turned into a large fireball that took the lives of dozens of engineers and high-ranking officers within minutes. Even though over 100 people were killed in that event, it was never made public until the mid-90s through the hidden files. On top of that, the accident was entirely preventable, one that happened only because the engineers were under immense pressure to meet a deadline, leading to careless safety protocols and poor engineering choices. Most of the people there were either burned or vaporized instantly from the explosion, and those who survived spent the rest of their lives suffering from the effects of radiation exposure. Just so the event would not be made public, it was reported that the high-ranking officials present during the test had died in a plane crash. The families of these men had no idea what happened to their loved ones until the files were made public in 1993, and the news was beyond devastating. The Soviets were more concerned about their public image in the space race and didn't want any news circulating that undermined that image. But that wasn't all they kept secret. Perhaps the most stunning aspect of the reports that caught people's attention was the Soviets' unexplained files of encounters with the impossible. These reports sounded more like something out of a frightening fairy tale than a scientific report, but were written so well that those who found the files didn't know what to make of it. From UFO sightings and structures on Venus, too polished to have been formed by natural means, to sightings that closely align with popular trends of extraterrestrial humanoid figures, many reports were found but weren't made public because the authorities didn't know what to make of them. These sightings were allegedly discovered by the same Venera landers the Soviets claimed were destroyed by pressure and acid rain not long after landing. The reports imply that the landers captured things that simply couldn't be made public, and the descriptions in the files were unbelievable. Aside from that, more details came to light about the death of Vladimir Komarov, a pilot who crashed in a space capsule when the parachute systems failed to deploy at the right time. The reports implied that a few more tests could have prevented something like this from happening. But thanks to rushed protocols and an obsession with being ahead of the US at all costs, things only took a turn for the worse. What makes it even more disturbing is that Vladimir knew the potential risks before going on the mission, and he ended up being just one of the many lives lost in the pursuit of space. Also, do you remember Laika, the female dog sent into orbit in 1957 as part of Sputnik 2? For decades, the story told was that the mission was a huge success that demonstrated to the world that space travel was possible for living creatures. What they didn't say was that the dog passed away from overheating within just 2 hours of launch, and nobody knew about her death until it was made public when the records came out in 1993 by Oleg Gazenko, a medical doctor who contributed to the mission. What makes it even more disturbing is the measures they took to keep things secret, especially at a time when they were blurring the lines between space exploration and making weapons. While the US was more concerned with establishing itself as the leader in space research and exploration, the Soviets were more concerned with these spacecraft getting used as potential weapons for the next global conflict. Because of this, they kept blurring the lines between space exploration and weaponization, and those who suffered the most were the ones who agreed to get involved in their programs. These pilots and engineers were never given the chance to speak the truth about the many horrors going on behind the scenes. All narratives were controlled by the government, and those who asked too many questions were silenced in the harshest ways. All the hype and success displayed by the Soviets were only a fraction of what truly happened, covering the many stories of brave discoveries and encounters with the unknown and costly mistakes. Even right now, the secrets are still coming to light, as there were many aspects of the files that remain shrouded in mystery. For example, what were the UFOs and unbelievable sightings mentioned in the reports? Why do certain aspects of the files remain classified decades after the Soviet Union ceased to operate? Well, Joe Rogan believes they have discovered signs of extraterrestrial life on Venus, with UFOs having features so similar to the ones people claim to have seen on Earth. One of those sightings he described was a flying object hovering over 50,000 feet above the sea, but moving to below 100 within a few seconds. Different astronauts have also come across strange sightings in recent years. One great example of this is Ivan Wagner, a leading engineer and cosmonaut who has served since October 2010 and spent over 300 days in space. He reported coming across a constellation of lights that didn't look or move like stars while trying to capture southern lights. Many people dismissed what he saw as glowing Starlink satellites from a distance, but the veteran pilot insists that he knows what he saw. Others found it strange that he would report seeing this when the ISS had what it took to at least take a closer look to address what it was based on the direction he gave. But they remained silent, and the report died off almost as soon as it came up. Because of this, many have wondered what would have happened if the Soviets and the United States had worked together instead of competing with one another in the space race. It is exciting to think of what we could have discovered along the way, with input from both sides complementing one another. Perhaps SpaceX's wild dream of colonizing Mars would have been a current reality. What we could have achieved is beyond exciting to think about. For now, NASA has at least 3 rovers active on Mars, with the oldest one in operation since 2012. Missions for exploring Venus are still in the works, given how difficult it is to study the planet from a much closer perspective, with most of them expected to launch sometime in the late 2020s. With such terrifying discoveries from the Soviets kept hidden from the public for so long, many might be happy to know that the Soviet Union no longer exists today. The Cold War is ancient history, and right now, Scientists from different countries are working together to boost space exploration to greater heights never achieved before. The International Space Station is a great example of this, housing astronauts from different space agencies at the same time. Even now, leading private tech gurus like Elon Musk have contributed to space exploration by launching reusable rockets and satellites for better network connectivity. With only a few exceptions, space exploration today is mostly seen more as a collaborative effort than a case of competition between countries, and astronomers all over the world hope it continues this way into the foreseeable future. So, what do you think? Are these discoveries as terrifying as he makes them out to be, or are they things you knew about all along? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.